Hello everyone, welcome back to the MCC, and today we welcome back Dr. Kafataris. It's been many months since we last spoke, so we're really pleased to have him on to discuss a lot of today's issues and also progress from our last chat. So without further ado, Dr. Kon, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zahi, and thank you to all of your listeners for supporting your show, and thank you for having me back.
No, it's awesome to have you back. So I'm really keen to ask you, from the last time we talked, the big topic back then was the anti-religious religion bill that they were trying to pass. What's been happening since? And
okay, yeah, so it was probably okay. Well, a lot's happened since then, and I guess it's probably good to go to give your listeners an update or your viewers an update, state by state, because effectively this is because we have a two-tiered system in Australia. We have federal laws and state laws.
yes.
And what a lot of people don't realise is that a lot of the action is at the state level. Okay, and so even though there was a lot of religious freedom was a sleeper issue at the 2019 federal election around free speech and the Israel Folau phenomenon, and the federal government then promised to give a religious discrimination bill at the federal level. A lot of people were questioning, well, so what will that actually give us? And I was one of them. I was a little bit cynical as to how much we would actually get from that bill, because much of the activity, as I said, happens at the state level. And one of the things about this federal bill was it wasn't going to override state law in general. There were a couple of sections where it was going to override parts of the laws of certain states, but it wasn't like a cover the field. We will get that this bill would change your rights if you lived in New South Wales or your rights if you lived in Victoria. Okay, so it wasn't that kind of law. And so that debate really didn't go very far because they unfortunately this is just my views. It's like you're trying to give, if one person wants black and the other person wants white, neither is going to be satisfied with grey, right? And so many people saw this religious discrimination bill as just the unfinished business of the same-sex marriage debate.
Right.
Because in the same-sex marriage debate, they tried to pass amendments to the legislation to protect religious freedom and protect people's rights to object and to hold to a traditional view of marriage on religious grounds. All of those amendments were defeated, right? Were voted down. And then we got the Ruddock report. And so it was basically kicking the can down the road.
Yes.
Okay. So many people were of the view, well, okay, well, you've given same-sex couples these rights. We want our rights now, right? And unfortunately, they're not really mutually exclusive. They're not really mutually compatible, because if your religious views lead you to conclude, and if your scriptures say that marriage is only between a man and woman, you really can't then agree with same-sex marriage. I mean, you can allow to same-sex couples to marry because the law allows them to do that, but you can't agree with it yourself. That's the point. Yep. And so then if you're going to then articulate your, the way I put it to people is that, my scriptures, Leviticus 18:22 says a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. It actually uses that word. So if I were going to describe same-sex marriage according to my scriptures, and it's not just my scriptures, it's the scriptures of the Jew, the Christian, and the Muslim, because they revere the Torah, right? Yeah. So I would say that, well, according to my scriptures, it's an abomination. Now, people say it's a bad word. Well, that's what the scripture says. I didn't say it. I didn't write it. Okay, it's what the scripture says. Yeah. So, do I have the right to say that and not be dragged before a tribunal? That's the the fundamental question. So, what the federal government tried to do, and I don't mean to labour a point here, but I want your viewers to understand what I think equality is. True equality, is I accept the same-sex couple's right to marry, even though I don't agree with it, but I accept it. You're not going to see me, standing on the street corner saying repeal the law. In the same way, they need to accept my right to quote my scriptures about it, even if they don't agree with it. That's equality. That's fairness. Yeah. All right. So unfortunately, it wasn't clear whether the federal bill would give us that. And so it didn't really get the degree of traction that the federal government thought it would get. As a matter of fact, the first exposure draft got a lot of opposition, which forced the government back to doing a second draft. And then they were doing a consultation process on that. And we were supposed to then get a final bill that would go before cabinet. Unfortunately, that's when the pandemic hit. That was about around March of last year. And it's been on the back burner ever since. Yeah, understandably, because obviously the federal government had bigger issues to deal with. All right. Mm-hmm. Backdrop of that was the bill at the New South Wales state level put forth by Mark Latham.
Yes.
All right. And that's probably the one we talked about last time.
Yes.
And that bill has had the submissions come in. All right. It had its survey. Something like 20,000 people responded to the survey. And roughly, don't quote me, but nearly 70% of the people who responded either supported the bill or supported with amendments. Okay, so you're looking now, nearly 3/4 of people actually supported this bill. There was then an upper house committee set up to examine the bill and to take submissions and also to take evidence from expert witnesses. I was honoured to be one of those witnesses that gave evidence before that committee. Yeah. We should have their report out sometime within the next couple of months, I think.
All right. Okay.
Right. And what that report says will determine where the issue goes. What I can say is, having read through nearly 100 submissions, okay, on the bill, what Mark Latham was able to achieve what the federal government couldn't achieve, which was to get broad support amongst all the major faith groups. So when you look at all the submissions on Latham's bill, the majority were supportive of the bill. Yes, they might have wanted some amendments here and there, but the Catholics supported it, the Anglicans were supportive, the Imams Council was supportive, the Jews, the Mormons, even the Scientologists were supportive of it, right? The organisations that weren't supportive were those that we didn't expect to be supportive. Equality Australia, those that are aligned with the LGBT lobby. And okay, you expect, because as I said before, you can't give someone grey. And I believe Latham did a good job in at least protecting our rights to make statements of belief and those sorts of things. So that's where that bill is at present. Also, I can tell you that the degree of interfaith dialogue and interfaith cooperation is steadily growing. And so we are seeing now the heads of the major faith organizations all talking to each other a lot more than they were before. Yeah. There have been meetings. I've been involved in some of those meetings, and it's interesting when you have Catholic, Protestant, Shia, Sunni, Jew, all around the same table, and realizing what we can agree on, and sometimes we've come up with things that we weren't really on the same page with. So we agreed, all right, well, we won't campaign against you, or we won't get in your way. So it's good to know, and so that's been very productive. A couple of issues your listeners may or may not be aware of would be that South Australia has now passed abortion laws that unfortunately, in my understanding, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, because this is not something I've been really all across, because from New South Wales, but my understanding is under certain circumstances, abortion up to birth has been allowed. Okay. Probably the more problematic development is the Victorian conversion therapy legislation.
I wanted to ask you about this. Yes.
Yeah, that's very problematic, because and it's something I have been I've studied in quite some depth, and I've read a number of submissions from people who are a lot smarter than me about this. Perhaps John Anderson, who's former Deputy Prime Minister, summed it up best. He said it was the biggest attack on our religious freedoms than he's ever. And I think it was. Can't remember if he's quoted was. It was words to the effect of. Okay, words to the effect of the biggest attack on our freedom of speech and religious freedom in living memory.
Wow.
Okay, so why was it so bad? Well, it was so bad because in its definitions, it defined. It basically said things like, no sexual orientation is a disorder, a shortcoming, or a state of brokenness. And it said that in like the objectives of the Act. And there's a problem with that because many religious many religions view homosexuality as a sin. Mm. And they define sin as to miss the mark. That's actually where what the word means in Greek. Amartia means to miss the mark, right? It's a shortcoming, right? So here you've got an act of parliament saying that it's not something, but yet religious texts say that it is.
Yeah, that's the conflict, yeah.
There's a fundamental problem there. Now you might say, oh yeah, but what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that the bill has two sections. There's the criminal code, or the criminal part of it, which got a lot of attention in the media, which was talked about jail terms and multi-$100,000 fines and things like that. But that's not where the real action is going to be, because the civil code was where I think the bigger problem is going to be. The civil code is where they've empowered the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission to be far more it's more empowered now to come after people who talk about conversion therapy or talk about anything other than the official narrative, all right? And they can be educated, quote unquote. They can be called before the tribunal. There's a provision in there that says that if you publish,
it's out of choice of the individual.
Well, this is what I was getting to. This is what I was going to get to. The law, the Act says that a conversion practice, with or without the consent of the individual, is illegal.
Yeah, that's
okay. And I've been part of something that your listeners probably aren't aware of. Actually, I'll grab it. This here is basically a sort of a scientific study we've done. Myself and a few other people have surveyed 78 ex-LGBT people. Right? Ex, yeah, 78 of them. We've taken their stories. We've also asked them for them to measure or rate their themselves before and after treatment. Okay, and the therapy could have been religious counselling. It could have been professional counselling.
Counselling, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We've rated separated them according to demographics, and you got people Australian background, Arabic, New Zealand, Asian, Latino, all sorts of ages. All right, and we've separated them according to their pre-change sexual orientation, so gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and their post-change orientation. A number of them, ended up being heterosexual and celibate, and a number of them ended up being heterosexual relationship. Basically, what our figures showed is that more than 50% of them were now exclusively heterosexual. 70% of them were living heterosexual lives, even if they had some same-sex attraction. All right. And the 30% who are still same-sex attracted were no longer living in same-sex relationships, and they were living on their celibate on their own. So we actually proved that change could occur. Right. Okay. Was it long lasting? Well, 21%. The change they had these changes 30 years ago or longer, and 71% had the change 10 years ago or longer. Okay, so more than 70% of them have had these changes lasting more than 10 years. All right. Now just to talk about what effects the therapy had, we found that there was significant reductions in anxiety, suicide, improvements in self-image, improvements in their relationships, improvements in their physical health, and reductions in their promiscuity. All right. On average, the average change was a 40% reduction in suicide, a 50% reduction in anxiety, a 50% improvement in self-image, 30% improvement in relationships, 20% improvement in physical health, and a 45% reduction in promiscuity. So without that change, without that therapy, a number of these people would probably have killed themselves.
And that's what those state governments want to stop.
That's right. So effectively, they want to take away the very therapy that we've shown, okay, can actually stop suicides. All right. Now, we've done our best to promote this far and wide. It's not just me that's been involved. Professor Whitehall, a professor of pediatrics, talks about things from a gender dysphoria perspective. We've got input from a psychologist who's actually treated people with this for decades. We've got also input from a lawyer talking about the legal aspects of the of these laws. Yeah. Interesting, the psychologist we had to get from America because we couldn't find anybody here that's willing to treat and go public about the fact that they're willing to treat people who are struggling with same-sex attraction.
Wow. But these are people that want help.
Exactly. That's the point. They want help. None of these people, it's like I say, if you're gay and you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. No one's going to try and make you change. But what about if you're not happy? What about if you're struggling with these feelings? And one of the big things I saw, the big problem I saw with this is that this is an attack on your fundamental human right as a person.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
So if it's like, okay, if you're an alcoholic and you want help, you have the right to get help for these unwanted mental preoccupations around your alcoholism. Why should somebody not have the same right to get help regarding unwanted mental preoccupations around sexual orientation? Right? But yet the Victorian government, in its infinite wisdom, okay, has decreed now that in Victoria you have no right to get help. Now it's even worse than that because there's a publishing offence. If you publish anything, right? There's
like what you have.
Yes. Okay. I believe it's not retrospective, and the law will come into effect, I think, officially in 12 months' time. Right. Wow. But once it comes into effect, and if we publish this after that law had come into effect, I think the fine is somewhere of the order of $10,000. Okay. Now that is notwithstanding whether the commission goes after you.
You're right.
And I found today. Remember, I said to you that the real action is going to be in the civil scheme.
Yeah.
All right. Well, after the passage of the law, February 28, the Age published a report where it said Human Rights Watchdog to turn its attention to gay conversion therapy. Victoria's Human Rights Commission will work with faith leaders and the broader community to educate them about the harms of gay conversion practices and only use the full range of strong new powers granted by the Andrews government if they prove unwilling to act to stamp out the practice. Okay. Sorry?
To educate them.
Yes, that's the word, educate. Now, in the legislation, it actually says that part of the functions of the commission is to fulfill the objectives of the Act, right? So if one of the objectives or one of the objects says that no sexual orientation is broken or disordered or whatever, then the commission then has the ability to, and if you say, let's say you differ with that, let's say you say, well, no, I believe that the homosexual lifestyle has lots of problems or whatever, right? Or I disagree with it based on my religious beliefs. Well, technically, you're contravening the objects of that act. Now, one of the problems with the commission is they can take a complaint from anybody, anonymous. You can be forced to appear before the commission.
Wow.
You can have your notes and your, stuff sort of summoned and I guess subpoenaed, for want of a better word, even though they're not a court. And then you're really at the mercy of the commission as to what they'll do. They can either do nothing. They can, work with you to educate you and to, encourage you to commit to, promising not to do anything more. Right. Or they can actually refer on to people like APRA, for example, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulating Authority.
Right.
So if they refer on to APRA, let's say, for example, I'm a medical practitioner. If I said something and the commission, brought me and if the commission weren't happy with my responses, they could. I'm not saying they would, but they could refer me onto APRA to look at my, ability to hold registration. Wow. Now, you may or may not be aware, but there's already a case of a doctor in Victoria who's had his registration suspended for
something you put on social media, yes?
Yes, for commenting on something to do with transgenderism and abortion and homosexuality. Okay, and so his registration he's still deregistered. It's
wow.
Still.
That was some time ago, last year.
That's right. It was actually, I think, August 2019 when it first happened. Yes, and so, and he's from Victoria, so it doesn't fill me with any great hope.
No.
Also, the bill, if you take somebody out of Victoria for a conversion practice, you're guilty. If
really?
If you, let's say you're doing you're giving counselling to somebody via Zoom, you're not in Victoria, but the effect of the practice is felt in Victoria or largely in Victoria, then that's illegal as well.
Wow.
And
so there'll be people listening to this and they'll think the whole conversion therapy is a bit, I don't know, backwards or prehistoric thinking. That's their opinion, and everyone's got a right to their opinion. But the reality is that I hope they realize that this has taken away religious rights.
Well, that's true.
You look at Christianity, Islam, whatever you want to, majority of religions, as you quoted the scriptures, like they're taking away the ability of people who are part of these religious communities to go to their religious leaders and say, hey, I'm having these feelings or whatnot. What is your, at least getting advice?
Yes, and the bill, the explanatory notes of the bill actually talk about that a religious leader having an informal conversation with somebody to suppress that, because it's a change or suppression practice.
Yeah, it's an attack on religion.
So yeah, it is. So to suppress them is bad, is illegal as well. Now, here's the straw man. Conversion, right? I've actually challenged people, and I'll challenge anyone. Give me evidence that people are getting shocked and being subjected to IVE spas now in Australia in 2021 or in 2015. Right? Yeah. It might have happened 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
When homosexuality was viewed as a disorder, and they did practice aversion therapy.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, one of the big go-to documents that the proponents of these bills have been has been a report from La Trobe University called "Preventing Harm, Promoting Justice," or "Promoting Justice, Preventing Harm," and that report, quote unquote, I've been very critical of it. They interviewed 15 people, that from 15, 1-5, all right, not 50, 1-5, and all they did was they got their stories. They didn't subject them to any background checks in terms of they may have done background checks, but they didn't. All they did was they reported their stories. They accepted whatever they said at face value. Yep. One report talked about a woman talked about being kidnapped and taken and held against her will and having electrodes put against her genitalia and all that. That would be criminal.
Yeah, of course it
is. And yet they never provide any evidence that police reports or any of that stuff, right?
No.
Okay, so so that's being held up as a scholarly report, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do this study. So this is a much more scholarly report. We actually talk about in the study the goals, the methods, the shortcomings, our strengths, our weaknesses, and we have tried to. So basically, we ask people on a 10-point scale, what was your anxiety like, when you first before you had the therapy? What's it like now? What was your suicidality like then? What's it like now? People have been able to. We also screen people so that because we knew this would be trolled, so we had people sort of vet them to see whether or not the stories were we thought they were legit, and we actually discounted some of them.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because we weren't confident that they were accurate and real people, right? Yeah. So we've this is a real straw man. This is criminalizing something that's not actually happening.
Yeah.
And in a backdoor way of directly attacking religion.
Absolutely.
And so. It's now law in Victoria. Unfortunately, the Liberal government, the Liberal opposition didn't oppose it at all. And I think only 9, I may have the numbers wrong, but I think only 9 members of the upper house opposed the bill. Jeez. It was in the 9 or 11. It was a ridiculously small amount.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So what I can say is that I won't talk about sources, but I think I'm quite confident because I've actually your listeners can be assured that I'm quite confident that we're not going to have this kind of law in New South Wales this term of Parliament.
Yeah.
What happens after the next state election in 2023? We don't know because it depends on who gets elected.
Yeah.
But given the near-death experience that Gladys had over the abortion bill, one would have to think that it would be very, very foolish to try and bring a law like this in. As I said, I have made inquiries, and I'm confident that we're not going to see it in New South Wales. The problem is the laws are the laws are now in Victoria.
And South Australia.
South Australia is coming. Queensland, the ACT, and Victoria.
Okay. All Labor.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes, interesting. We didn't cover one last thing that's happening here. Mark Latham has put forth a parental rights bill.
Right.
Okay. Which it's also going to be the subject of an inquiry, and it would basically remove the teaching of gender theory in schools.
Good.
And it would also give parents the right to take their children out of certain classes. Schools would have to make curricula far more accessible to parents than they already are, and parents would have the right to object and take their kids out in advance. And so that bill, we need, Mark Latham needs all our support for that.
That's being submission proposed right now.
Sorry.
That's been proposed right now.
It's been proposed. There was a survey, a public survey out. I think that closed 28th of February. But what we need to do now is to lobby MPs to say that we want that those rights that are in that bill, and we need to show the politicians that parents in New South Wales. See, one of the things I liked about the bill was the bill said that parents have the final say over who is over what values are taught to their children, particularly in relation to biology and sexuality.
Yeah,
because as we'll see, gender theory is not anything where there's any hard science behind it. It's an ideology.
And so what is it called? Sorry,
It's called the Education Amendment, the Parental Rights Bill.
Parental Rights Bill. Okay.
Okay.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link under the video.
Yeah. Yes.
And that way, yeah, people can take that to their local MP.
Yes.
Joe Biden's signed an exec order, pushing, the whole transgender athletes into women's sport. I've done a bit of reading about it. I mean, they're pushing things like blocking, puberty blocking drugs.
Mm-hmm.
They're issuing that hormone therapy, as well as giving kids access to mutilation surgery.
Mm.
It's all before, well before the age of adulthood.
Yes. Yes.
They're making that accessible. I mean, for me, that's shocking and obviously hugely concerning that they would actually propose these things. I mean, I'll go on and on about what's going on in the US since, Joe Biden took over, which the whole left movement is really in full force. You've got people like Nancy Pelosi wanting them to no longer use mother, daughter, brother, father in Congress. She broke her own law the day after, by the way.
Yes, of course.
That was hilarious when they were trying to impeach Trump, and she said, "I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother." The day after she proposed it, which is hilarious as always with these guys.
Yes.
But I mean, I'd love to know your opinion, your thoughts on what's going on there. And the reason why I want to ask you this question is, in my opinion, I feel like that's already seeping through Australia, and it's already whatever America do, the whole world follows.
Yes. Well,
do you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, look. Unfortunately, America is seen as the cultural leader of the West, and it's like I forget who said it. Someone said, tell me who. Give me control of a culture's songs, and that will give me control of the culture. Words to that effect, right? Yeah. And so the arts and the arts and the media are always key drivers of cultural change, right? Before there was same-sex marriage, there were movies like Philadelphia and Brokeback Mountain and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, right? And so Hollywood now is exported everywhere.
Yeah.
And Hollywood is, movie makers make movies based on ideology. They don't just make movies for entertainment. Of
course. I mean, I remember when Caitlyn Jenner, or what's his name? Is Bruce Jenner.
Bruce Jenner, yeah,
was given the award of Woman of the Year. Like,
yes,
my goodness.
Yes. Well, this is, perhaps probably the best thing I can do is maybe take you through where did all this come from.
Please.
Okay, because this is actually the end of a process that began decades ago, and it has its roots in a movement called postmodernism, right? And postmodernism is where interestingly, predominantly male white European intellectuals, right, started to say we need to be skeptical of everything, and we need to be radically skeptical of everything, and even what is held to be truth, and they were intensely relative about everything. In that there is no objective truth. There's my truth and your truth, right? And we need to, and so that was where sort of postmodernism at its beginnings. Then from there, it progressed into what's called critical theory, right? And then the end result of critical theory is this modern concept of social justice, right? And so let me just sort of show you why it's a critical theory. When you say that there's no such thing as absolute truth, right? Then everything is relative.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that there is no such arguments like, there is male and female. That's an absolute statement, right? When you're saying that, gender is biological, and that's an absolute statement. But if everything is relative, then and by relative it means that depends on what you think about it, right? So can you see that the end result of that is, okay, well, if truth is relative, then, just because you think you're male, just because you think I'm a male doesn't mean I need to think I'm a male.
Yeah.
You see? Then basically this idea of critical theory, and I want to read a couple of quotes. What they started to do was they redefined how we look at reality, because the idea came about that, well, things such as truth and evidence, they were that we only use them because they are the products of white, predominantly heterosexual male intellectuals, right? Okay, the European idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually absolutely true.
Yes.
Right. And so I'll read a couple of quotes from this book. It's a really good book. It's called Critical Theories, but it's actually, you consider that cynical theories, right? How universities made everything about race, gender, and identity, and why this harms everybody. It's a really scholarly analysis. They're not religious people that write this, but it's a really good book. And along the lines of Douglas Murray's book, The Madness of Crowds. Right. Okay. And I like the way they analysed on. Yeah, they've got this idea that they call it the postmodern knowledge principle: radical skepticism about whether objective knowledge or truth is obtainable, and a commitment to cultural constructivism. In other words, you construct the reality of your culture. This denial of objective knowledge or truth and commitment to cultural constructivism and belief that whatever it is we call truth is nothing more than a construct of the culture calling it that, has been largely retained with one important proviso. Under applied postmodern thought, identity and oppression based on identity are treated as known features of objective reality. That is, the conception of society as comprised of systems of power and privilege that construct knowledge is assumed to be objectively true and intrinsically tied to social constructions of identity. So instead of looking at things whether things are true or false, they're now looking at things in terms of who is the victim and who is the oppressor.
Yeah.
Okay, the oppressed and the oppressor.
Yeah.
So they assume that oppression exists everywhere.
Yeah.
And you've then got to find, okay, where is the oppression? All right. So, for example, Oprah Winfrey is oppressed by definition, according to this theory, because she's female and she's black. Forget the fact that she's worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Billions.
Billions. Whatever she is, whatever she's worth, right? But myself, I'm 4 points the oppressor, according to them, because I'm European, I'm male, I'm heterosexual, and I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's and then their political principle is a belief that society is formed of systems of power and hierarchies, which decide what can be known and how. So that's where this came from. Now, let's look at the principles that there are 4 principles they use, and you'll see. The first principle was the blurring of boundaries. Okay. So what they tried to do was they blur the boundary between, instead of having things that are black or white, you have spectra.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as male or female. You've got male, female, and in between, right? Blurring of boundaries. The second thing you'll see is this idea of the power of language.
Right.
Okay. Words drive everything, and they analyze what you say to the nth degree. Yes. To make sure that there's, you're looking for trigger warnings, and there needs to be safe spaces and stuff like that, right? Just the power of that. You'll notice that, and it's 1984 was all about that. Orwell talked about, when you get control of the words of a culture, you control everything else.
Right.
I mean, that was the whole reason why Jordan Peterson got in trouble. Yeah. Because he refused to use the
pronouns.
The pronouns. That's right. And then the the third one was cultural relativism, and the last one was the loss of the individual and the universal. So in other words, we don't look at things in terms of people are that there's a universal truth, and the people are individuals. We reduce people to being part of an identity or a minority. Okay. So I'm not an individual. People that they don't look at me as an individual. They look at me as, okay, well, I'm part of the white identity. I'm part of the male identity. I'm part of the Christian. You follow?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you apply all of those, all right, this idea of social justice came about. And here's another quote. It says, if knowledge is a construct of power, which functions through ways of talking about things, knowledge can be changed and power structures toppled by changing the way we talk about things. All right. Thus, applied postmodernism focuses on controlling discourses, especially about problematizing language and imagery it deems theoretically harmful. This means it looks for and then highlights ways in which the oppressive problems they assume exist in society manifest themselves, and then they look to, okay, well, there must be oppression. We just got to find it, and then we look at changing it. All right. And you know, from 2010, basically we've seen this emergence of research justice, and it says here that this alarming proposal demands that scholars preferentially cite women and minorities and minimize citations of white Western men, because empirical research that values knowledge production rooted in evidence and reasoned argument is an unfairly privileged cultural construct of white Westerners. So in other words, you know, you don't select a piece of evidence because of whether it's true or false.
Yeah.
You select your evidence based on whether the person is black or white, or where, you know, and if the argument comes from a white, wealthy, male, heterosexual, that's inherently privileged. And someone who's not that is inherently a victim, and therefore they need to be protected, right?
Like,
it's
like what's going on right now with Piers Morgan and Meghan
yes,
Markle.
Yes.
That's a classic example right there.
100%. And this has been going on this began decades ago, right? No, it was in the early 2000s that the scholars started to come out with these ideas of critical theory, and then 2010 when the idea of research justice and from there came political correctness. Yeah. And now 10 years later, things have gone absolutely nuts, right?
It's been like this, slowly feeding into society over decades.
Yeah, and
people don't realize it. People don't realize what's going on.
Yes, and so just one or two more quotes, because I think frequently all these approaches are combined to produce what is usually known as social justice scholarship, quote unquote. Though apparently diverse, these approaches to other knowledges, in other words, the idea that because you come from a minority group, that knowledge I must take into account, or it's equally valuable to whether 2 + 2 = 4, for example. They're all premised on the idea that people with different marginalized identities have different knowledges stemming from their shared, embodied, and lived experiences as members of those identity groups, especially of systemic oppression. Yeah. And then listen to this. Teaching is now supposed to be a political act, and only one type of politics is acceptable: identity politics, as defined by social justice and theory. Wow. Now, with that background, I want to take you to, okay, let's look at transgenders, people who struggle with gender dysphoria. All right. Can you see that now, because of that background? Well, that's a real thing. Gender is relative because of the influence of these scholars, right? Okay, well, if gender is relative, and it can be relative, and this person identifies as a female, then he's a male because he's got testicles, all right? That person needs to be protected, right? And they're a minority because transgenders are in the minority. So if you've got people who assume that who look at everything in terms of victim and oppressor, and they're on the lookout for where's the minority in this, and I've got to protect the minority, right? Can you see that then almost by the transgenders are perfect for it? Yeah, and so you're only going to see this, and it seems to be really prevalent amongst the left and the socialists, right? And so basically, there's only one outcome. You must have official validation and recognition, because once you accept the definition of critical theory and social justice, then to do otherwise is social injustice.
Correct.
You see?
Yeah.
And so what I might do down the track is I'll probably end up doing a short video on this with PowerPoints and things, because I realized that this is something that's not very well understood by a lot of people. I didn't understand it, and it's the heart of this is now applied to race. It's called critical race theory.
Yep.
And that's at the heart of and a lot of people who marched in the whole Black Lives Matter thing, movements, don't realize what's at the heart of this. It's actually racist because it assumes that I'm a racist because I'm white and I'm male. So it's prejudging me according to my race, which is racism, correct?
Yeah.
You see? So, but here's the problem. Irrespective of what Biden does and what his orders are, objective reality has a way of reminding us. Okay. Yeah. Let me give you an example. The law of gravity. You can think that that's relative, right? And you can think that the law of gravity doesn't apply to you. And you can test it if you want by jumping off a building. Yeah. If you survive, you will realize that there is an objective thing that is true, such as the law of gravity. Yeah. Right. And I think that it's going to bring us all back to earth with a thud. Really? Okay. Because here's the problem with transgenders playing women's sports. I was reading some of the things that talking about Biden's executive orders, and it talks about standards that different associations have, like the NCAA has a standard that women, that transgender women have to have testosterone levels below a certain thing for a year before they can play. Yeah. That's not going to make any difference to a 30-year-old guy who's already gone through puberty as a guy, who drops his testosterone level for a year. It's not going to affect his male tendons and his male bones. Yeah. His muscles, even with lower testosterone, are still going to be way stronger than a woman. Yeah. Okay. It's a fact. It's a biological fact, right? It's different if you block puberty, right? And then, you then transition after you've blocked puberty. That's a completely different biological phenomenon. But you've got a 30-year-old man who's gone through puberty, who might be 6'2", wants to become a woman. He's not going to become 5'5", right? Yeah. He's, it's funny. I saw a funny video by a guy who you might have seen it. He's a 5'9" white guy that goes around and saying, "What if I told you I identified as a woman? Would you believe me?" And it's on a college student. And I said, "Okay, well, that's how you feel. What if I told you I was a black woman? Oh, okay, if that's how you feel." Then he goes, "What if I told you that I was a 6'5" Asian woman?" You're not 6'5", dude. But that's how I feel. That's how I identify. He's taking it to the it's tongue in cheek. Okay, but the bottom line is, sorry.
But it proves a point.
Proves a point. Yeah. The bottom line is men in women's sports, biological men who've been biological men post-puberty, okay, are not going to become biological women simply because they take hormones and their testosterone comes down.
That's right.
And all it's going to take is lawsuits that are, just like the Kira. You've probably heard of the Kira Bell lawsuit from England.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all it's going to take is someone is seriously injured, and they'll take the federal government to court, right? And sooner or later, we will come crashing down with it. My concern is how many people are going to get injured along the way. So interestingly, by the time those things happen, is it likely that Joe Biden will still be president? No, because he's what, 80?
Yeah, well, he's behaving a lot older than 80.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is even if he did run again, he can only be president for 8 years. We might be talking 10 or 20 years down the track when the full effect of this, because the full effect. Sorry,
you think it'll be that long?
When it might be, when we see the full effect, it might be shorter. But what if it's longer? Right? It's not going to affect Biden personally. You see, and so it's easy for them to make these executive orders. So this is ideologically driven. This is not driven by science. Even puberty blockers. Yeah. In the study that we've done, there's a really good section on transgender and gender dysphoria by Professor Whitehall. And this is all new science. This is all new. There's no long-term studies that have looked at the long-term effects of these. And by long-term, I'm talking 20 years. Yeah. You see, so we just don't know, and so it's all experimental. I don't think it's right that we should be subjecting our kids to these experiments, and that's one of the reasons why hundreds of doctors signed a letter to Greg Hunt for an inquiry into the gender clinics. Good. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to go ahead.
All right. I really appreciate you giving us the background on where this all came from. I want to know what you think in terms of what the objective of all this is. Is the idea? I mean, it's been a plan obviously for decades and many years by certain people. Is the idea to eventually take away people's obviously freedom of speech, fundamental rights? Is that the objective? Because a lot of people go, why would the governments do this? Why are they doing this? Why are they, doing all these things and making the world a little bit crazy?
Well, look, this is my belief. Okay, hang on, I'll get something that your listeners will find very interesting. It's called Agenda.
Masters of
Deceit. It's Agenda and Agenda 2. Right, and so if anyone wants to watch something that's really eye-opening, I highly recommend those videos. Okay. My view, it's my view, is that because socialism, and the Democrats are socialists. Yes. Right? Socialism works on the premise that basically everybody has to work for the government and be dependent on the government.
Godless society.
Well, that's right. It's got to be, you've got to be dependent on the government, right? Okay. So socialism would want everybody to be getting paid from the government and then directing all their assets to the government.
Government, yes.
Right? And that really is just a dictatorship in another name. Instead of having, we've always had dictatorships all through history, or oligarchies where a few families ruled everything, right? Even today, you've got the Clintons and the Kennedys and the Bushes, and you've got the few families that pull all the strings, right?
But the difference was that was out in the open that they were dictators.
Yes, and so now the Democrats would want once you get a certain amount of people on a public benefit, then the government can do what they like.
Correct.
Because the government then, because you're not going to vote against them because your livelihood is dependent on them.
Correct.
Now, there are two institutions that I believe, and this is again my belief, two institutions that anyone has to overcome if you're going to get control of a society. The first institution is the family. Because if you can control the education and raising of children and take parents out of the picture, then you have good little worker bees, right?
Yes.
Number one. The second institution they've got to overcome is the church, because the church ultimately will bow to the law of God rather than the law of man.
Yes.
So is it any coincidence that the two institutions that are most under attack are the family and the church? So does that make sense?
Very well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe that's where this is all headed. And you're only going to see more and more attacks. And can I say this is happening because a small group of people have become politically active, and the majority of people are naive, are inactive. And if the majority actually got their act together and got involved in the political process, this wouldn't be happening.
And you said that last time. It's a small group of people with loud voices.
That's right.
The majority generally stay silent.
That's right. You probably remember I used the analogy of the game last time.
Yeah.
Well, the majority, if the majority sit on the sidelines and they let the minority play the game, the majority can't complain about the outcomes.
Correct. Yeah. And another point that you raised last time we spoke was the fact that, people forget the power that they have. They don't get involved in the politics. They don't know their local members. They don't know the policies even that they're voting for. And that's where people really need to just start to actually show like they really care.
Absolutely. And I had last week I had an hour meeting with my local member. He takes my calls. He knows who I am. I sat down with him. I was very upfront. He told me what was happening, what he was going to support, what he wasn't going to support. It was in line with our values. And I was there with another friend of mine, and I said to him that I want to see you stay here, and so whatever I can do to help you in the next election, let me know. Do you think he's going to give me a call come election time? Of course he will. Okay, and I'll be telling everybody in the electorate to support him.
Yes.
Now, everybody can do that, if they really care about the future of the country.
Rather than sit back and complain about what you're seeing on the news.
That's right.
Get out.
I don't have any sympathy for people who complain if they're not willing to do anything.
Me either.
So,
really, yeah.
All right.
All right, sir. Well, on that note, we shall leave it there. It's absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Bringing light to a lot of the subjects that I think people are just scratching their heads about today.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Art. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Cheers.